When a bully kicked off a disabled veteran's wheelchair, he thought the Royal Guard would just watch, but one sharp slap taught him more about respect than any lecture could. Here's what happened. The sound of shattering glass made tourists jump as a half-empty beer bottle exploded against Buckingham Palace's outer wall. "Oi! What's everyone staring at?" Jake Wilson's harsh voice carried across the courtyard, the smell of cheap beer and cigarettes following in his wake. "Just some fancy prison, innit?" Built like a boxer who'd spent more time in street fights than actual rings, Jake shouldered his way through the crowd. His leather jacket had seen better days, much like the knuckles that poked through his fingerless gloves, both marked by years of choosing violence as a first resort. "Watch it!" he growled, shoving past a young mother who'd pulled her children back too slowly for his liking. "Bunch of sheep, all of you, standing around taking pictures of what? Some bloke in a fancy hat?" His bloodshot eyes fixed on the Royal Guard standing at attention nearby, the guard's perfect posture and immaculate uniform presenting everything Jake despised about authority. The morning sun caught the guard's brass buttons, their gleam somehow making Jake's scowl deepen. "Look at this mug," he announced to no one in particular, his London accent thick with contempt. "Standing there like he's something special. Bet he thinks he's better than us regular folk, don't he?" The smell of stale beer grew stronger as he moved closer to the guard's position. The crowd began to shift uneasily, recognizing the familiar tension that preceded violence. Parents guided their children away, while other tourists created a subtle circle of space around the unfolding scene. A group of teenagers, who'd started to raise their phones, quickly thought better of it. Something in Jake's bearing suggested he wouldn't react well to being recorded. "Oi, soldier boy!" Jake called out, now deliberately invading the guard's space. "What's wrong? Too posh to answer?" His boots scraped against the courtyard stones as he planted himself directly in front of the guard. "Or maybe you're just scared. Yeah, that's it, innit? Hide behind that fancy uniform, 'cause you ain't got nothing else." The guard remained motionless, but there was something in his bearing, a subtle tension, visible only to those who knew what to look for, that spoke of years of real combat experience. Not that Jake would have recognized such signs. He was too busy playing tough guy to his unwilling audience. "You know what I reckon?" Jake spat on the ground near the guard's polished boots. "I reckon you lot are just... Perhaps we should let others enjoy their visit in peace." A calm voice cut through Jake's tirade. Jake whirled around, his fists already clenching at being interrupted. His eyes found the source of the voice, and a nasty grin spread across his face as he spotted the wheelchair. Here, finally, was someone who couldn't possibly stand up to him, in more ways than one. Jake took a few swaggering steps toward the wheelchair, his eyes darting between his targets. "Well, well, what have we got here?" His voice dripped with mock concern. "Someone trying to play hero." The veteran sat straight backed despite his disability, his weathered face calm. A row of service medals caught the morning light, medals Jake couldn't name, but instinctively resented. "No heroes here, young man," the veteran replied evenly, "just suggesting we all remember where we are." There was something in his tone, a quiet authority that came from facing far worse than street thugs, that made several observers nod in agreement. Jake's face darkened. He wasn't used to such composure, especially from someone he considered vulnerable. "Oh yeah? And where exactly are we, old-timer? Some tourist trap where we're all supposed to bow and scrape?" He turned back to the guard, voice rising. "Look at him, standing there, like a bloody statue, while we all pretend he's something special." The guard remained motionless, but there was a new tension in the air. Jake stepped closer, deliberately pushing boundaries. "What's wrong, soldier boy? Can't defend yourself?" His breath fogged the brass buttons. "Or maybe you just don't care that I'm right here." He poked the guard's chest. "You taking the piss out of your whole circus?" A ripple of concern went through the crowd. Physical contact with the Queen's Guard was strictly forbidden. The veteran's hands tightened on his wheelchair's armrests, recognizing the escalating danger. "You're making a mistake, son," the veteran said, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "That man you're taunting, he's not some ceremonial statue. These guards are active-duty soldiers." Active duty what? Jake spun back toward the wheelchair. Active duty dress-up dolls, more like, standing around all day while real people do real work. He gestured at the palace walls. "This whole place is a joke, and he's the biggest joke of all." The guard's eyes remained fixed forward, but those who looked closely might have noticed his knuckles whitening slightly on his rifle, the only visible sign of his iron discipline. "Tell me something, old man," Jake advanced on the wheelchair, his body language increasingly threatening. "Since you're so keen on defending him, what's it like, being stuck in that chair while these soldiers play pretend?" His voice turned cruel. "Must be frustrating, watching someone stand still all day when you can't stand at all, eh?" A shocked murmur ran through the crowd. The veteran's face remained composed, though something flickered in his eyes. Not fear, but the patience of surviving real battles. "Young man," the veteran began, his steady voice sharp against Jake's aggression, "that uniform represents—" "I don't give a toss what it represents," Jake shouted, weeks of anger finding an outlet. "Look at him! Look at all of this!" He gestured wildly. "Standing there, guarding what? Some rich family's summer home, while the rest of us struggle? And you—" He turned back to the veteran with dangerous focus. "You roll in here thinking you can lecture me." The morning had grown warmer, but onlookers shivered. There was something in Jake's stance now, a coiled tension promising violence. The guard remained unchanged, but the air around him crackled with potential energy. The veteran's medals caught the sun as he straightened in his wheelchair, but before he could speak, Jake took another menacing step forward, his shadow falling across the veteran's lap like an approaching storm. "I served 30 years in the Royal Marines," the veteran said quietly, his calm voice carrying unexpected authority. "Lost the use of my legs in Helmand Province, saving 3 of my men from an IED. His eyes met Jake's with unwavering steadiness. "So yes, young man, I believe I've earned the right to speak here." Jake faltered for just a moment, thrown off by the direct confrontation with real sacrifice. But like many small men facing their own inadequacy, he quickly covered his uncertainty with increased aggression. "Marines, was it?" he sneered, leaning down into the veteran's space. "And look what good it did you. Threw away your legs for what? So you could sit here defending some bloke who won't even acknowledge you exist." The veteran's weathered hands remained steady on his wheelchair's armrests. "That guard you're mocking, he's not just standing there. He's carrying on a tradition of service that goes back centuries. The same tradition that had me and countless others willing to give everything for something bigger than ourselves." "Everything?" Jake's laugh was ugly. "Looks like you did give everything, didn't you? And what have you got to show for it?" He circled the wheelchair like a predator, his voice dripping with mock concern. "Can't even stand up for yourself anymore, can you?" The veteran's reply was measured, each word carefully chosen. "Standing isn't what makes a man, son. It's what he stands for." He glanced at the guard, then back to Jake. "That's something you might learn, if you'd take a moment to—" "Learn?" Jake cut him off, anger flashing in his eyes. "Only thing I'm learning is how pathetic this all is. You sitting there spouting nonsense about tradition. Him playing statue like a proper mug." His voice rose with each word. "And all these sheep," he gestured at the crowd, "eating it up like it means something." The veteran remained composed, though something in his bearing suggested he was preparing for what might come next. "I'd do it again, you know. Give my legs 100 times over for my country, for my mates, for the principles that uniform represents." That quiet dignity seemed to enrage Jake further. He planted himself directly in front of the wheelchair, hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Principles?" Let me show you what I think of your precious principles." The morning sun cast Jake's shadow across the veteran's lap, but the older man didn't flinch. Instead, he looked up at his tormentor with something close to pity. "The fact that you can stand here, freely expressing your contempt for everything we've sacrificed to protect, that's exactly what we fought for, even if you can't understand it." A muscle twitched in Jake's jaw. The veteran's composure was getting under his skin in a way the guard's stoic presence hadn't. Here was someone he could hurt, someone who couldn't fight back, yet somehow he felt like he was losing ground with every exchange. "Understanding?" Jake's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Oh, I understand plenty. I understand you're just a broken old man living in the past. I understand that your precious uniform," he jerked his head toward the guard, "is nothing but fancy dress. And I understand," his hands moved toward the wheelchair's armrests, "that it's time someone showed you both how the real world works." The veteran didn't move, didn't call for help, didn't show fear. His eyes remained locked on Jake's, filled with a strength that had nothing to do with physical capability. It was the kind of strength that came from facing real battles, from making real sacrifices, the kind of strength Jake's bullying couldn't touch. But Jake, consumed by his own inadequacy and rage, was past recognizing strength in any form but violence. His fingers tightened on the wheelchair's armrests as the morning sun climbed higher over Buckingham Palace, witnessing what was about to unfold. "The real world, eh?" Jake's fingers dug deeper into the wheelchair's armrests. "Let's see how well your principles protect you now." His voice carried that particular cruelty of someone who'd finally found power over another, even if that power came from targeting the vulnerable. The veteran remained steady, his medals gleaming in the sunlight. "I've faced worse than you, son. Men with real power, real conviction, not boys playing at being tough by threatening the disabled." That struck a nerve. Jake's face contorted with rage. "Playing?" He emphasized the word by shaking the wheelchair slightly. "Does this feel like playing to you?" The wheelchair rocked, but the veteran's expression never changed. "You want to know what real toughness looks like?" the veteran asked quietly. "It's not this. It's not threatening those who can't fight back. I've seen real courage in the young men and women who put on that uniform," he nodded toward the guard, "knowing they might not come home, in the soldiers who carried me out under heavy fire after the IED hit, risking their lives to save mine." "Shut up!" Jake's voice cracked slightly. "Just shut up with your war stories and your medals and your—" "The lad who saved me," the veteran continued, as if Jake hadn't spoken. 19 years old. Could have left me there. The smart thing, really, with the Taliban closing in. Instead, he threw himself over me when the mortars started falling, lost 2 fingers and got a chest full of shrapnel, but he didn't leave. The crowd had grown utterly silent, the veteran's quiet words carrying more weight than Jake's shouting ever could. Even some of the earlier tourists who'd moved away were drawing closer again, drawn by the power of real sacrifice being described. "You think that guard's just standing there for show?" The veteran's eyes briefly met those of the motionless guard. 3 months ago, he might have been patrolling in Afghanistan. 6 months from now, he could be deployed anywhere in the world. That uniform isn't a costume. It's a commitment. Something I don't expect you to understand. Jake's knuckles had gone white on the armrests. "Understanding?" He spat the word. "I understand that you're sitting here defending a system that doesn't care about either of us. Playing soldier didn't do you much good, did it? Can't even walk anymore. And for what?" "For what?" For the first time, real emotion crept into the veteran's voice. "For the right of people like you to stand here and mock what you don't understand. For the freedom you're using to threaten a disabled veteran. For every person in this crowd to live in a country where they're free to visit their palace, take their photos, live their lives without fear." "Without fear?" Jake barked a harsh laugh. "Let's test that theory, shall we?" His grip shifted on the wheelchair, something dangerous glinting in his eyes. "Let's see how brave you are now, old man. How about we find out if those medals help you fly?" The veteran's hands moved to cover Jake's on the armrests, not fighting, just resting there. "Son, I have already faced the worst day of my life, lost my legs, lost my ability to walk, but never lost my dignity. Whatever you're planning to do, it won't change that." That quiet dignity seemed to drive Jake into a frenzy. "Your dignity?" He leaned down, his face inches from the veteran's. "Your precious dignity won't help you when I dump you out of this chair. Your medals won't catch you when you hit the ground. And your toy soldier over there?" He jerked his head toward the guard. "He'll just stand there and watch, won't he? Because that's all he's good for." The veteran's eyes remained steady, even as Jake's grip tightened further. "I'm not afraid of you, son. I feel sorry for you. Because while you're standing here, trying to prove your strength by threatening a disabled veteran, you're actually showing everyone here your weakness." Something snapped in Jake's expression. The last thread of restraint, already frayed by alcohol and rage, finally broke. "Weakness? I'll show you weakness." His muscles tensed as he prepared to act on his threats. "Time for your last flight, old man." With a savage grunt, Jake yanked the wheelchair backward, tipping it until the veteran had to grip the armrests to stay seated. "Not so dignified now, are you?" he snarled, the wheelchair teetering dangerously. "Still feel sorry for me?" Several people in the crowd stepped forward instinctively, but Jake's wild-eyed glare stopped them short. The veteran remained composed, though his knuckles had whitened on the armrests. "Last chance, old man." Jake's voice dropped to a menacing whisper. Beg me not to do it." When the veteran remained silent, Jake's face twisted into something ugly. "Have it your way, then." With a violent shove, he sent the wheelchair toppling sideways. The veteran, unable to catch himself, hit the ground hard. His medals clattered against the stone courtyard, the sound sharp and accusing in the horrified silence that followed. But Jake wasn't finished. As the veteran tried to push himself up on his arms, Jake kicked the wheelchair away. It skittered across the stones with a harsh metallic screech, coming to rest several feet away. "Go on, then," he taunted, standing over the fallen man. "Crawl to it. Show everyone how dignified you are now." The veteran's face remained composed, even as he lay there exposed and vulnerable on the cold stones. His eyes, however, held something that made Jake take a step back. Not fear or hatred, but a kind of patience, the patience of someone who knew what was coming. "That uniform you're mocking," the veteran said quietly, his voice steady despite his position. "It stands for everything you'll never understand. Loyalty, sacrifice, the courage to face real battles, not just pick on those who can't fight back." Jake's boot drew back, rage and shame warring on his face. "Shut up! Just shut your bloody mouth!" The boot started its forward arc toward the veteran's ribs. That's when it happened. The sound of boots on stone, precise, measured, deadly, cut through the tension like a knife. The guard had moved, but this wasn't the ceremonial march tourists came to photograph. This was the controlled movement of a combat veteran, each step carrying the weight of real battlefield experience. Before Jake could complete his kick, a white-gloved hand clamped onto his shoulder with iron grip. The guard's other hand caught the veteran's arm, supporting him with surprising gentleness, even as he maintained his hold on Jake. The contrast was stark. Tender care for the fallen serviceman, implacable strength restraining the aggressor. "Sir!" The guard's voice carried the quiet authority of someone who'd commanded men in battle. "Are you all right?" His eyes never left Jake, even as he addressed the veteran. The veteran nodded, his dignity intact despite his position on the ground. "I'm fine, son. Just need my chair back." The guard's grip tightened almost imperceptibly on Jake's shoulder, making him wince. The morning sun caught the medals on both servicemen's chests, one on the ground, one standing, but both carrying the same weight of sacrifice and duty. Jake tried to jerk away, his face a mixture of fury and dawning realization that he'd severely miscalculated. "Get your hands off me! You can't!" The guard's voice cut through his protest like a blade. "I believe," he said with deadly quietness, "you and I need to have a discussion about respect." His next words carried the weight of years of service, of battles fought and comrades lost. "But first, you're going to watch me help this brave man back into his chair. And then," the grip tightened further, "we're going to teach you what real strength looks like." With a precision born from years of military service, the guard helped the veteran back to his feet. Or rather, supported him with a respect that acknowledged both the man's dignity and his sacrifice. The movement was careful but efficient, born of battlefield experience, where you learned to help wounded comrades without making them feel helpless. "Easy does it, sir," the guard said quietly, his grip steady as he helped the veteran maintain balance. There was nothing ceremonial in his movements now. This was pure soldier, the kind who'd carried wounded mates under fire. Jake stood frozen, the guard's other hand still locked on his shoulder with unmovable authority. He watched, trapped, as the guard retrieved the wheelchair with his free hand, bringing it back with the same precision he applied to every aspect of his duty. Each movement was measured, deliberate, a sharp contrast to Jake's earlier violent actions. "Thank you, son," the veteran said, as the guard helped him settle back into his chair. His voice carried no shame, no defeat, only the quiet dignity that Jake's actions had failed to strip away. The guard adjusted the veteran's medals with careful fingers, straightening them on his jacket. It was a small gesture, but one that spoke volumes about the brotherhood between servicemen. Only then did he turn his full attention to Jake, who suddenly seemed to shrink under that focused gaze. "Now then," the guard's voice was quiet, but carried an edge that made several onlookers step back. "Let's discuss what happened here." His grip shifted slightly on Jake's shoulder, turning him to fully face the veteran. "Look at those medals, sir. Do you know what they mean?" Jake tried to look away, but the guard's grip didn't allow it. "I don't—" "That's right. You don't know." The guard's voice cut through any protest. "That ribbon there? Distinguished Service Cross, awarded for gallantry in active operations against the enemy. The man you just assaulted earned that by saving 3 of his fellow Marines while under heavy fire." The guard's next words were delivered with precision of a drill instructor. "The dignity you mocked, that comes from service. The strength you tried to break, that was forged in battle." He turned Jake slightly, forcing him to face the full impact of his actions. "And that uniform you insulted, it's worn by men and women who would die protecting even people like you." The morning sun had reached its full strength now, casting no shadows for Jake to hide in. The guard's brass buttons gleamed like judgment, his bearing no longer ceremonial, but rather that of a warrior dispensing justice. "So here's what's going to happen," the guard continued, his voice carrying the weight of every soldier who'd ever stood watch over civilization. "You're going to apologize to this gentleman, not because I'm forcing you, but because it's the only way you leave here with any shred of dignity yourself." Jake's face twisted into an ugly sneer, his earlier fear giving way to a final surge of defiance. "My arse! I'm apologizing to some The slap cracked across the courtyard like a gunshot. The guard's white-gloved hand moved with military precision, catching Jake full across the face with enough force to snap his head sideways. The sound echoed off the palace walls, hanging in the morning air like a bell toll. Jake staggered, his hand flying to his reddening cheek, eyes wide with shock. The guard's posture hadn't changed, still perfectly controlled, still radiating that deadly calm. Only now, there was an edge to his presence that spoke of carefully measured violence, of discipline, that could become devastating in an instant. That, the guard's voice was steel wrapped in silk, was for disrespecting a man who sacrificed more than you could ever understand. His eyes locked onto Jake's with sniper's focus. "Would you like to try that sentence again?" The crowd had gone utterly still. The slap had been like a thunderclap on a clear day, sudden, shocking, and carrying the promise of a storm. Jake stood frozen, his cheek blazing red against his now pale face, all his previous bravado erased by one precise strike. The veteran hadn't moved or spoken, but there was something in his eyes, not satisfaction at Jake's punishment, but a quiet understanding of duty being carried out. 2 tours in Afghanistan, the guard said, his voice carrying across the now silent courtyard. That's where I learned the difference between thugs and real warriors. His eyes hadn't left Jake's face, which was still blazing red from the impact. You strut around here thinking you're powerful because you can threaten those who can't fight back. But let me tell you something about real power. Jake's hand was still pressed against his cheek, his eyes darting between the guard and the nearest escape route. But the guard's presence was like a wall of granite, immovable, unyielding. Real power, the guard gestured to the veteran. It's sitting right there in that wheelchair. It's in every medal he earned, every sacrifice he made, every moment he spends showing dignity in the face of creatures like you. Each word landed like another slap. Real power is serving something greater than yourself, something you clearly can't comprehend. The morning sun highlighted the contrast between them. The guard's immaculate uniform and ramrod straight bearing against Jake's now hunched posture and dishevelled appearance. More than just physical differences, it showed 2 different kinds of men, one who stood for something and one who fell for anything. I could have you arrested, the guard continued, his voice level but carrying an undertone of steel. The assault on a disabled veteran would put you away for quite some time. But first, his eyes narrowed slightly, first, you're going to understand exactly what you've done here. The veteran finally spoke, his voice carrying neither anger nor victory. The uniform he's wearing, son, I bled for what it represents. My mates died for it. And this young man standing here, he's not just guarding a palace, he's guarding every principle that allows even people like you to walk free. Jake's eyes dropped to the ground, unable to meet either man's gaze. The redness from the slap seemed to have spread, staining his whole face with shame. Look at me, the guard commanded, and Jake's head snapped up automatically, responding to the authority in that voice. That chair you mocked, those medals you disrespected, they represent more courage than you'll show in your entire life. And every second you stood here, proving your own worthlessness, this man showed you what real strength looks like. Some of the younger children in the crowd had started asking their parents questions in whispers, but most of the adults stood in respectful silence, witnessing justice being dispensed with military precision. Now, the guard's voice dropped even lower, somehow becoming more threatening in its quietness. You're going to apologize. Not because my hand is itching to teach you another lesson, though it is, but because somewhere in that small, cruel mind of yours, you're going to find a shred of the dignity this man has shown you. Jake's mouth worked silently for a moment, the sting of the slap still burning on his cheek. He swallowed hard, his voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry. The words seemed to cost him physically, dragging themselves out of his throat. Not to me, the guard said firmly. Look him in the eye. Show at least that much courage. Jake's eyes reluctantly met the veteran's steady gaze. The older man's face showed neither triumph nor anger, only that same patient dignity that had enraged Jake earlier. Now it just made him feel smaller. I'm sorry, Jake repeated, louder this time, his voice cracking, for what I did, for what I said. The redness of his cheek matched the guard's uniform now, both marking different kinds of discipline. The veteran nodded once, accepting but not absolving. Sorry isn't about words, son. It's about understanding. Do you understand what you did here today? Jake's shoulders slumped. For the first time, he looked his actual age, young, lost, and trying to cover it with cruelty. I attacked someone who served, who sacrificed. His hand touched his cheek again, unconsciously. Someone better than me? No, the veteran's voice was firm. You attacked what you thought was an easy target. Instead, you found out what real strength looks like. Remember that feeling. Remember that lesson. The guard's presence behind Jake remained unyielding. The police will be here shortly, he stated. Not a threat, but a simple fact. I expect you'll cooperate fully. Consider yourself fortunate. They'll be far more lenient than my colleagues would be. As if on cue, 2 police officers appeared at the edge of the crowd, their presence somehow less commanding than the guard's crisp authority. Jake didn't resist as they approached. The fight had drained out of him, leaving behind something that might, with time and reflection, grow into understanding. The veteran watched as the police led Jake away, his weathered face thoughtful. Only when they had disappeared into the crowd did he turn to the guard. "Thank you, son," he said quietly, "though I suspect that slap wasn't entirely regulation." The guard's face remained professional, but something like a smile touched his eyes. "Some lessons, sir, require immediate feedback." He straightened to attention, his bearing returning to ceremonial precision. "Will you be all right?" "Takes more than a bully to shake me, lad." The veteran adjusted his medals, which gleamed once more in the midday sun. "Carry on with your duty. You do us proud." The guard's white-gloved hand snapped up in a crisp salute. Not the ceremonial gesture tourists photographed, but the real thing, one soldier honoring another. The veteran returned it with equal dignity, the exchange witnessed only by those who understood its meaning. As the veteran wheeled himself away, the guard resumed his post. His posture was exactly as it had been before, ramrod straight, eyes forward, the perfect picture of ceremonial duty. But there was something else visible now, for those who knew to look. The steel beneath the ceremony, the warrior behind the ritual, the true meaning of standing guard. Now, some might question why a ceremonial guard would break protocol, risk his position, to defend a disabled veteran. But perhaps the better question is, how could he not? The uniform he wears, the position he holds, the tradition he upholds, all of these exist precisely to protect what that veteran fought to preserve. In a world where strength is often confused with cruelty, and power with the ability to harm others, this incident serves as a powerful reminder. True strength isn't found in targeting the vulnerable, but in standing up for them. Real power isn't measured by how much harm you can inflict, but by how much good you can protect. The guard resumed his post that day, returning to his ceremonial duty with the same precision and discipline he'd always shown. But everyone who witnessed those events left with a deeper understanding of what that ceremonial duty truly represents. It's not just about standing still, it's about standing for something. What would you have done in that guard's position? More importantly, in your daily life, when faced with the choice between standing idle or standing up for what's right, which will you choose? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more powerful reminders of what true service, sacrifice, and strength really mean. Remember, sometimes the most important duty isn't the one written in protocols, but the one written in our conscience.